Hey everyone, you're listening to the Active Turnkey podcast, a podcast designed for hands-off, passive real estate rental investors. In the Active Turnkey podcast, you'll hear Tom Olson and Jared Stoutmeister discuss all things turnkey rentals with other turnkey providers, service providers, and rental investors. Our goal is to help you reach your financial freedom and whatever comes after that. Let's go. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Active Turnkey podcast. I'm your host, Jared Stoutmeister, and I have with us, as normal, the Tom Olson.
Just me.
Me.
I'm just me.
We know him as Tom Olson, and we're back.
Everybody
again.
out there knows me as the Tom Olson.
Correct.
Because it's kind of like the Ohio State. There's only one real Tom Olson.
Have you ever had someone come up to you and say,
I have.
"Hey, the Tom
Actually,
Olson"? Have you really?
Yes. I've been at meetings before, and it's like, hey, it's the Tom Olson. I don't really like it, but it is what it is. And the whole reason why we chose it was because I was trying to figure out a domain, because I actually have a website called thetomolson.com now. Mm-hmm. And also, when my marketing team was trying to figure out, you have to have like your own little, I don't know, statement or something, whatever you call it, in order to grab your own domains for social even. Mm-hmm. So we tried to find one that was available for all of them, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, and the Tom Olson was available, so that's what they chose. So it wasn't my choosing.
Sure.
Just so everybody knows.
Yeah.
It wasn't my choosing. It was the marketing team. It was their fault. If you don't like it, it's all on
I
them.
blame marketing.
I'm blaming marketing.
I do it constantly.
Yeah.
I don't care what it is. It's marketing's fault.
Marketing's fault. Yes. No.
I wonder what this edit is going to look like on this.
I'm just kidding.
Podcast.
I'm just kidding. But me and Jared were just talking about this before we got on here. We were talking about renting a property and your credit score, and you know, we had a question with our property manager about whether or not we should accept somebody who's self-employed. And I was like, well, I don't really want a blanket statement, you know, no self-employed people, because I think sometimes self-employed are the best tenants, but they also can be the worst tenant, you know? Yeah. And Jared had a bad experience with somebody who was self-employed, and then what stinks is, like, in the end, you can't garnish their wages. There's no way to kind of really go after them if they don't pay. And so it was just interesting, and we started talking about credit, about when I was 19 years old and I got my first Target credit card. Those are dangerous. Don't get Target credit cards. Those are just not good. And I was told, somebody, you know how when you go to your 19-year-old buddies and they know it all.
Oh yeah.
Right? When you're 19, you know everything.
All of my 19-year-old buddies know everything.
Yeah. All 19-year-olds know everything. If you don't believe me, just ask them.
Yeah.
They will tell you how much they know. And I was told, and so I thought that I was supposed to go out and charge money on the credit card and then not pay it back for a couple months and then start paying it back. And I thought that's what was going to help build my credit score. So we got talking about credit scores because of the self-employed, and I was like, well, it really matters about their credit score. And if their credit score is 720 and 780, like, do I really want to not allow them to rent my property only because they're self-employed? And I told Jared, I'm like, there's really no excuse for people not to have at least a 640, 670, 650, whatever credit score. And anybody below that means that they really have like issues. Yeah. And even our own like tenant qualification, we go all the way down to 500. You know, and we'll make some make some exceptions in those low 500s, and maybe we'll take more security deposit or something like that. But I'm just like, I told him I don't understand how people can be that low, because even me, I made mistakes, and I was still, I don't think I was ever below 640, even as a 19-year-old stupid kid. And I made the statement that, you know, the younger you are, the more you think you know, and then the older you are, the more you realize that you don't know.
You don't know anything. Yeah.
So so what are we here for, Jared? We're here trying to tell everybody what we don't know.
Yeah. And hopefully this is bringing you value at this point. And
we're just going to give you some ideas. We're here to talk and entertain you. This is purely entertainment purposes, right? It's not for investment advice.
Sure. No, but
we've already clarified that.
But we clarify.
Do not trust anything we say.
We clarify that by saying that we learn all the time, right?
Exactly.
I mean, you learn something every day, and you're trying to
incorporate what you learn and what other people tell you. That's why we go to networking events, so we can just talk about what they did wrong and incorporate it into our process.
And we can also tell everybody all the things that we've done wrong.
Yeah, and then that's how you'll learn, and it's nice when you could try something and it works for the first time without mistakes, but that's not normal. And so
today we're just going to talk about our experience then, right?
That was not.
That's really all it is. It's our experience. This is what we think.
Yeah.
This is what we think has worked for us.
It is. It's
and
true.
in a couple of years,
Trial
we'll
and
find
error.
out something that's better.
Trial and error for sure. And now Tom's going to come from a perspective today where somebody else did the trial and error, and we get to benefit from it. So he's teaching
Jared already
us.
knows where we're going. This is dangerous.
Yeah, I know. I generally speaking, guys, I do come with some scripts. Tom has too much experience. He doesn't have to.
No, I'm scriptless.
He's scriptless.
I don't do well with scripts.
Yeah.
People say think out of the box. I don't even know what a box is.
True.
That's the problem. So I need people that are very organized in order to help keep me organized.
And that is me. I am highly organized.
Very organized.
Yes, that's that was a joke for all of you who know me. So today we actually do have we're not going in that direction, although that could be a podcast someday. But today we're talking about something that should be near and dear to any investor, especially in today's world. In today's world, with how things have changed in the last couple of years, we're going to talk about how to choose the right rent amount for your turnkey property.
Ooh, I like it. That's a great podcast. We haven't done that yet?
No, sir. Right now.
Wow, we're already how many podcasts are we
into?
We're
in the 50s, late
50s, 60s,
something like that, yeah.
Well, I think it's a pretty important
It is.
podcast.
I mean, we've talked about it on different podcasts, but not a focused one. But, a few years ago, rents in a C-plus neighborhood were $1,200. For a pretty nice house, $1,200 a month for a 3-by-1 bath, not a huge house, but since then that same house is worth $1,500.
$1,495.
Yeah. And then for us, what we're experiencing in Gary is some of these houses that would have been renting for
$850,
$950. Yeah, right, ballpark now. Now they're renting for $1,300. $1,200. It's
11,
insane.
12, 13.
Yeah, there's just a wide range. So
I guess that's the first point to make, in the podcast is if you haven't raised your rent in the last 2 years, you are missing out.
Huge.
And in fact, if you don't want to raise your rents, it's okay. Especially if you are renting properties in Northwest Indiana or in Pensacola, Florida, because I will be glad to buy that house from you, because I know you're not making as much money as you could be.
A lot.
And then when the lease ends, I will either not renew or I will raise it to market rent, and I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
So some people, it's interesting because I think that's the first thing that we could talk about, and this wasn't really planned, but I feel like it's a good place to start here. Is if you have a current rental and you haven't raised your rent in the last 2 years, you are. I promise you, rents have gone up 25% minimum.
Yeah.
In most markets. So if your house was renting for $1,000, it should be $1,250 now. And if you don't think that that's material difference, just start doing the math, and you'll see $2,500, $3,000 in difference. That is where does that go? It's all to the bottom line. It doesn't get no more expenses happen. Other than taxes at the end because you made more money.
Well,
but
for some investors, that is your cash flow. I mean, that was your cash flow before that. So now you're basically doubling cash flow if you're leveraging.
Right. So if you were making $300 a month and you haven't raised your rent in 2 years, you probably now should be double what you were making before, which is an interesting point. And this wasn't really part of the podcast, but one of my good friends, Glenn Stromberg, he says. He tells all of his owners, in the long run, if you take this 5, 10, 20 years out, all the maintenance and all the repairs that come on your property, and you're going to have maintenance and repairs. We talked a lot about that on this podcast, I know, is going to get covered by the increase in rent.
Should.
But the problem is if you're not increasing your rents, then where is it coming from? It's coming from your bottom line. So first of all, before we even get into how do you actually market your rent and how do you figure out how much rent to charge, know that if you haven't charged more for your rent, then maybe you need to get with your property manager, or maybe you need to figure that out. And when lease renewals happen, I would tell you, I think it should be a minimum of $100. Honestly, there's not a rental that I can think of that probably shouldn't be at least $100. And I think that there are markets and there's cycles where people are afraid to lose a good tenant. Maybe if they've been there for a couple of years, they don't want to lose them. And I've been there. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I've got a guy who lives upstairs from this building right here, and he's been here for 20 years.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy's probably paid for the whole building.
Yeah.
He's been here for 20 years. And we raised his rent last year. I mean, we haven't raised it as much as maybe we could have or should have over the years, but we are always consistently raising rent. And that's one thing. Every time there should be a lease renewal, I would always encourage you to always raise the rent something. They should be used to it.
So you said you have raised the rent?
Oh, yes, we have. Okay. Yep, we have. It's like, so every time a lease comes due and there's a renewal, I always good markets, bad markets, good economies, bad economies, I always raise the rent.
Yeah, I think that if you don't, then you're setting up your tenant to not expect it.
Exactly, 100%.
That's certainly a good way to go.
Even if it's $25 or $50,
that's good.
I'm not saying every single year you're going to have $100 like we've had the last 2 years. And honestly, really, I believe, lease renewals for me, most unless they've been in like really low end, like one bedrooms and they're like $600, I probably aren't going to raise those $100 a month. But your typical 3-1, 3-2, 4-1, 4-2 type of property, I would say the last 2 years should have probably been $100 for lease renewals. Now we're not talking about a new property that comes in the market that's completely vacant and it's been repainted or been redone. Those were probably raising even more than that. But so that's the first thing I would probably say is like, if you haven't been raising your rent, please get on it. Do not lose. You're losing money. Yeah. Like it's money that's yours that you're leaving on the table.
Yeah, we've shared this in many cases. We do acquire. That's one strategy. We do acquire properties that are occupied. And
under-rented.
They are always.
And I always wonder, why are they selling these properties? And then you look at the rent.
Yeah.
And then now I know. Well, I just picked up a property in Pensacola, Jared, less than 6 months ago. It was rented for $675. It's a 4.2. And on the same street as we're leaving the subdivision, I saw a for rent sign. So what do you think I did?
Looked it up.
I called it, and and we're driving to the next property that we're looking at, and they wanted $14.95 for a house on the same street that my house was rented for $675. I bought that house, and it's becoming vacant here in the next month because there's no way I was going to be able to raise that $700 a month. No. And I mean, I'm sorry, but this is a business that I'm in, and so we will take that property, we will do a rehab on it and make it look really nice, and then we will probably get $1,500 a month for rent for it. I mean, so.
Well, typically, Tom's 100% right. Typically, if you do buy that property and it is under rented, you're not going to keep that tenant. That tenant's not going to come up and make up a difference of $200 or $300. They're not going to want to pay that increase. So you're going to have to be okay with that. So you should be buying that house with the intent to do a rehab at some point in the next year.
You got it. Yep.
Because it's foolish to not get that increase. But also they're not going to be willing to pay. So you just almost have to know that. And in some cases, I feel like it's even a waste of time to even ask a tenant if they're going to want to increase the rent $400. I mean, there's just crazy situations in that case. But that is something you want to pay attention to, because every single we've never bought a house that I can remember. I mean, I shouldn't say never. Maybe a couple where we bought it, and from our purchase price, it was a good deal. Like, as from an investor side, it's as far as like their rent, it's just amazing how low they come in and how under rented they are. And so how do you choose? You like Tom said, no matter how you're doing it, whether you're buying a property and you're doing a full rehab or you have one that's in decent shape, how are you determining that? So Tom.
Well, I think you just brought up a good point there, and maybe we probably should start there too, because I believe part of the way you're going to determine rent is this a previous person that's already been in there? Because I think that has a part of this decision.
Sure.
And then the other part of it is like, how nice is this house? Like,
yes.
How does this house compare 100%. To what else is in the neighborhood?
Tom stole my notes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't even realize that I did that.
He jumped ahead.
I'm sorry. Sorry, Jared.
And it's okay, because Tom's the boss. He's the Tom Olson, and he makes his script live.
I'm so Jared.
He writes his scripts live.
And because I'm not wearing my glasses, I can't even see Jared's notes, so I wouldn't even be able to steal them if I knew that. But so, Jared, what do you think?
No, you're exactly right. I think so. So basically, what happens though is, You get somebody who owns the house in Pensacola and they're renting it for $675, and he sees that house down the block is renting for $14.95, and so what do you think he's going to assume? He's going to want to raise his rent and try to get as close to you.
Right. Oh yeah. Kick those people out. Get $14.95.
Yeah, $14.95.
Probably not going to.
And how long is the house going to sit? A long time. It's going to sit for a long. You're not going to place that tenant at $14.95. So there are certainly some factors that go into that, and we were going to get into that today.
Well, that's because I didn't buy from a great turnkey rental provider.
Oh wow,
that's true. See,
okay, there you have it.
Now, if I would have, then I would have probably already been rented at that amount.
That's true. We solved that problem for you guys.
Yes.
But
that's a good point, because if your house doesn't have the finishes that people want, and I think you have to look at rentals just like you look at a property to purchase. I think people sometimes, and I've even made this mistake over the years, think, oh, it's a house. Everybody has to have a place to live. It doesn't really have to be that nice. I just can rent it. It's just a rental. And I've really gone away from that mindset myself personally. Even my realtor in Florida will sometimes send me houses, and I'm like, no, I don't want a house that looks like garbage. I don't want a house that has 7-foot ceilings in the whole house. Yeah. I don't want a house that looks like it's kind of just like a lean-to, or it looks like it was just like a house that was a shack at one point and that was added on to, and then added on to, and then added on to. I mean, we probably still own some properties like that, and we probably have sold some properties like that over the years, but I've really changed my stance on that. I want a normal-looking property with a normal outside layout, with a normal inside layout. Yeah. And honestly, it's because I think I make more money. I might even have to pay a little bit more for that product, but I'm gonna make more money in the long run because it's what people want. Yeah. Something I've learned about real estate, and it's not just true with rentals, it's also true when you go to sell, is that everybody wants what everybody wants.
100%. Yeah, I call it HGTV for renters. They want a beautiful home too, just like an owner does, and they're willing to pay high-end rent for that, but you got to give it to them. And you said, Tom, I mean, everyone's got to live somewhere, absolutely, but they're not going to pay your price. They're not going to pay that price, so they're going to need to pay. It's just like everything else. When I talk on the first call with investors, I usually bring up the case that the negativity about Gary was how hard it was, or it has been, in finding good tenants. Who they pay their rent, they don't damage their property, they make enough money to do whatever. And my thought is, these are people who are more or less, in some cases, slumlords. And my argument has always been, if you're providing them a D+ at best property, what makes you think you deserve a B+ quality tenant? That B+ quality tenant's not going to live in that home. They're not going to at all. So if you want that good tenant, or if you don't want it and you're going to supply that D+ quality product, then don't complain. You're getting what you paid for. And
this all boils back down to how much you charge for rent.
Absolutely.
And by the way, that also boils down to how much money do you make as a rental investor? How much cash flow do you actually get on a monthly basis?
And you can do this, but you can be that rent ready, that very relative term that we like to use. But just keep in mind that may be the type of tenant you're getting, and you should have to be okay with that. You just should.
Yeah, in business, kind of a rule that if you've read a lot of business books over the last 10, 20 years, you've learned that the people that are the cheapest on everything normally don't make the most money unless they're in extreme volumes. If you're going to be that person, you better have hundreds of rental properties if you're going to be that step above slumlord type of you're just, now the people that make the most money in any sector really are the people that are like probably the most expensive. And so, like, for me, my thought process has always been, I want to be the most expensive. I want to be the most expensive in the neighborhood. But I want there to be a reason.
Yeah, it has to justify
why I'm the most expensive. I want my house to be one of the nicest homes in that neighborhood.
And one way to do that is, and one way I describe it is, when that property comes up to market, what does that look like compared to everything else in the area then?
Exactly, yep.
Why would they choose your home? And that's eventually one thing I was going to bring up. I'll just bring it up now. Why would they choose your property over the one next door that's for rent?
So if your property is, say, $1,400 and the property next to it is, say, $1,300, why? Is there a reason?
Yeah.
Why they would? And I learned this a long time ago from a partner I used to have about even looking at when you're going to buy houses. When I'm looking at like, let's just say I have an option to buy like 10 different houses. and let's just say that they're all the exact same house. I know that doesn't happen, but let's just say they're the same floor plan, they're the same square footage, they're the same bed bath count. Everything about them is the same. They're in the same subdivision. Okay, I promise you, there's still going to be a difference between every one of those properties, and that's kind of how you have to look at it. Even as a landlord, to a certain degree, you have to look at it like, if my potential customer, which is the tenant, the resident, has a choice between these 4 properties, who are they going to choose? Why are they going to choose that? It's kind of like doing a marketing plan. You talk about the avatar, going out and figuring. So you know who your avatar is.
Yeah.
Well, who do you want in your property? Do you want the person that can barely afford to pay for your property? That like the only reason why he chose yours is because it's the cheapest. He only chose yours because that's all he can afford. Or do you want somebody that could have rented any of the properties and chose yours because yours was the nicest, and that he thought that he was going to get the best product by buying yours, and he's willing to now pay $50, $100, $200 more than any other property in that market per month, which adds up a lot, people. I can't stress to you the difference between $50 more per month or $100 more per month, especially over the long haul. Sometimes we don't think it's worth it to spend an extra $5,000 on a property, but when you start getting $50, $100, $200 more per month, the ROI is just...
It's madness.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Those are some good points. So look at the comps, right? So that would be a way where people could possibly determine what to charge for rent.
Yeah. So let's touch on that. So I did that, Tom. I went and I looked through some of my own personal properties that I have in the Gary area. So I have properties, several that are here by the office, and so typically what most of us would do is, what do we do? We're going to go to Zillow. We're going to go, maybe if you
look at
buy...
the Zestimate rental.
Look at the rental Zestimate. And
because that's always accurate.
It is not, unfortunately. No, but in some cases they're on. The issue is the radius it's pulling. So you got to be very careful where your house is located and where it's pulling. It could be going in negative, maybe. And so I went through, and in some cases it was right on it. I was really pleased. And in some cases it was low, and in other cases, for one, I have one here by the office, the one in Harrison we were talking about today. They had the rent estimate for that house at like $13.99. It's a 3-1 brick, and Gary, that's too high in my opinion.
Well, and it's funny you say that, because I even had an argument one time with a guy, because he's always bashing Zillow, and he's always saying how bad Zillow is and how it's always off and blah, 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 blah. And, I have done enough acquisition. I have done enough market research on buying, on renting throughout the last 15 years of my life to know that you're exactly right. Like, sometimes Zillow's low, sometimes Zillow's high, and sometimes Zillow's pretty much right on.
You're
and
right.
I'll be honest with you,
correct.
I actually think over the years they've gotten closer to being more on. But what I think is the most interesting of all is that when you are acquiring a house, they're always high. And when you're going to sell a house, they're always low.
Sure.
I don't know why that is, Jared.
Sure.
But anyways, I do think that Zillow is a good market research place. But I think the biggest thing you want to do is do what we talked about. Don't just look at the numbers and say, oh, this is his estimate, this is what these properties are renting for. You actually have to go to those properties and dig a little deeper and be like, because Zillow will actually even show you certain properties and how much they rented for. You can click on the little rent symbol there, and it'll show you this is what these properties were listed for rent over the last 6 months, year, whatever the case is. And then go back to your finishes and your house and how nice your house is compared to everybody else's house. Just like you would for buying a house or selling a house, you want to make sure that you are comparing apples to apples.
Absolutely, and so that's right away. And we do that when we flip a house, right? When we flip a house, we look at the comps, but we don't just look at the comps. We don't just look at the spreadsheet that has.
Because when we're selling, most of them are less than what we're going to sell for.
Yes.
And when we're buying, most of them are more than what we're going to buy for.
So what we're going to do is we look at the data on a spreadsheet first. It gives us a story, which is helpful. But then we go into each one of those properties that we see as similar to our square footage, our bed bath count, all those different things. And we're going to see, well, what are the differences between our product or what our product will be compared to what these houses are. And we see, okay, well, this one sold for 140, but we know ours is going to sell for at least 150. So you're doing the same thing for rental property too. You need to do the same thing. What kind of finishes do they have? And occasionally, if you go onto Zillow, they'll have photos. You might get lucky, and they may still be on there, where you can see what that person did to their property and see where you're at. But frankly, in the end, it's still, that data could still be even old. You may be looking at a property that was rented a year ago, and we know a year ago rental properties was significantly lower. 100%. So you have to take all that into account when you're doing it. Now, so I'm going to jump in. I'm going to give a few things that should matter when you're comparing and trying to gauge it, and then Tom's going to come with a totally different perspective, and he's going to drop the mic. So I already mentioned you're going to look at Rent2Meter and Zillow. I think Zillow is good. At least it's just a reference point. It's not going to make the deal for you, but at least it gives you something and to start the conversation.
And if you're a landlord that manages your own properties, then maybe you want to reach out to other landlords in the area and say, hey, how much are you getting for these houses in this area? If you're if you're working with a property manager, then you're asking your property manager. Your property manager is doing some of this research for you. But there's other research you can do.
I think if you are finding your own rental price, because the issue is, typically speaking, most investors aren't doing 10 houses in a one small radius. Mm-hmm. They're doing one. Right. So you don't have that reference point. Whereas someone like us will place 10 houses or 15 houses in a mile radius, like in a few months, right? I mean, it happens frequently. So we have a lot of data points to be able to tell you where the rent's going, and you may not have that. So I would say, first of all,
we also know how to compare apples to apples. Like these other houses may be nicer or may not be as nice as this.
Absolutely. So in my opinion, I have even had situations where I know of investors, and I've done it a couple of times, where before Olson Property Services was a property manager, I paid a property manager to place my tenant, because they knew the prices. They gave me some recommendations. I even access to a better lease than maybe I had personally. Things like that, different advantages. But specifically the rent price and also the tenants. They'll even know.
And it takes time to do all that stuff. And
it's just something
we wouldn't want to do. Right?
I don't need to do with that. So that's the first thing. And I was going to get to that eventually. Is you may not have that ability to do that or that expertise. Pay somebody who does, to find a good price at a good rent number, and you'll be good. That I think it'll be worth it for you in the end.
That's a good thought, Jared. That's a good thought.
Every once in a while.
That's a good way to think about it, Jared.
So
just keep going, Jared. How else would you figure out how much to charge for rent?
So this is what I would do. Okay, I'm playing along. No, I mean you do want to be very careful, because Tom mentioned it. Sometimes we do say, oh, that's a 3-bed, 1-bath, 600 square feet. There are variables, and tenants pay attention to it. So you do want to check the build. You want to check the area. Again, I mentioned Zillow. The radius sometimes can be pulling from, say, if you're not careful, they may be pulling, like for us, Gary and Maryville. So you want to make sure that you're not getting some Maryville properties that have higher rents into yours, and which would be in Gary. That's going to factor in and could be an influence on maybe why you think yours is worth more or the rent's higher and it's not, based upon that. Of course, you want to look at bed bath counts, square footage. One thing that doesn't move the needle for me that I've noticed, Tom, for rent is in this area is a garage, AC.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't see tenants, like if we were to throw out a property and say this is $1,295 and there's no AC and there's AC, there's really not much of a difference. In the end, in our community, people are used to putting in window units. Here's the question.
I would probably say most of that's probably in Gary.
Yes,
specific. If you get outside of Gary,
it's true.
It may have a little harder time. But I mean, you're probably right in the long run in Northwest Indiana. So there's going to be different markets,
absolutely,
and different parts of the country that might be a little bit different. And I know, like a place in Pensacola, Florida, it's required. You have to have AC, where you don't have to have furnace. Up here, you have to have furnace, don't necessarily have to have AC.
Yeah, it's definitely perspective. This is not for everybody or for all situations, but this is here. But we've already said it finishes. You cannot, like if yours is a rent-ready property, you cannot compare your property to a higher end product. You can try it, but you're not getting your rent, and then you're going to wonder why your property's on market for so many days.
That's a good thought.
You have to be able to compare all those different things. But if you have a higher end product, you know and should expect that you should have low days on market. And here's one thing as I finish my portion here, is one thing we have seen is the first of all, if you do a high end rehab and people like where they live, they tend to want to stay. Who wants to move if they like where they live?
Absolutely.
And then secondly, if people leave and you do a higher end rehab, typically what we have found is our days on market for when we're putting a house back on the market a second time or a third time is that they rent quickly.
Absolutely.
And so that's what you want. It's not even the first time you place a tenant, it's how quickly can I get these tenants in the properties. And so those are things you can identify. There's certainly more, but the finishes, make sure you're paying attention and know your competition because that can make a difference for your days on market.
Absolutely. So those are some great ideas, Jared. And those are some things that, I've heard in lots of different conferences that that's how people pick how much they're supposed to charge for rent.
That's right, man. That's the best way,
I'm going to throw an audible here. And I know I've never done that to Jared.
Nope.
I've never thrown an audible.
I thought I was being smart this whole time.
But this is what we're going to do, Jared. Okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to wrap up this podcast.
What?
And I'm going to tell you that we're going to come back in the next podcast. So you have to listen to the next podcast.
There's a cliffhanger.
And it'll be part 2.
Copy.
Let's just say it'll be part 2 on how to choose. What's the name of it?
It's how to choose the right rent amount for your turnkey property.
For your turnkey property.
So mine should be maybe changed to one way to choose the right rent amount.
We could do that. Part 1, part 2. We will be back at the next podcast, and we're going to tell you maybe a little bit of different perspective. We're going to go down a different little path with this, and I think it'll be fun. It'll be fun. So let's do that.
Tom thinks it'll be fun.
Jared, we've already gone 32 minutes here,
yeah,
so I have a feeling this next part's going to be a good 20, 30 minutes, and I don't think people want to stay on this one podcast for an hour. So let's just do that. I think that's
Tom's excited. I'm excited. We'll see how it goes.
If this has brought value to you, then give us a 5-star review. Tell your friends about us. Tell it personally. Share us. Subscribe, all those things, thumbs up. We would love to have you here at the Real Estate Free For All event. We've got September 30th through October 2nd. I'm also doing free crypto calls. I know that people, this is not about crypto, but I am starting to see how digital currency is going to be something that is going to go hand in hand with real estate and how we're going to have to understand how to use it. So I do those as well. If you're interested in those, you guys can hop over to goodsuccess.com and find out more information about that. But remember, hey, we build rental portfolios for investors. This is what we do. We take out all that. If you work with us, you don't even have to worry about how to choose.
Wow.
Because we do it all, the work for you. All you have to do is answer your emails, buy your house, and decide when time to sell is, and then just make sure that you cash your checks when you send them to you each month. And we'd love to help you. If you'd like for more information about that, you can go to buy, B-U-I, olsongroup.com and learn more about that. Get on our buyers list. And we're getting, 10, 20 people a week, it seems like, on our buyers list. And Jared's talking to new people every day that are trying to help us flip the city of Gary, Indiana. And we'd love to help you there with that.
That's awesome. Tom, I appreciate your help there.
Yes.
Active Turnkey.
The best way to buy rentals. Don't forget, be on the next one.
Olson Group Network makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast should not be considered professional advice. Unless specifically stated otherwise, Olson Group Network does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement. Any third-party materials or content of any third-party site referenced in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions, standards, or policies of Olson Group Network. Olson Group Network assumes no responsibility or liability for the accuracy or completeness of the content contained in third-party materials or on third-party sites referenced in this podcast or the compliance with the applicable laws of such materials and/or links referenced herein.